everyone, welcome back to Vibe Check Mindful Minutes. I'm BP, Behavior Intervention Specialist for the Cochise County School Superintendent's Office.
And I'm Zach, Program Manager for Project Arizona Bright Futures.
Today we have a really special episode for you. We're here with Ron Reddock and we're going to be talking about evolving character education.
Ron, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Ron Reddock. I'm a longtime teacher. Started back in the 70s, and I've been watching education grow up until now, and I'm still active as a teacher.
Thank you, Ron. So we're going to go over just a couple questions so everyone can gather a background about you. So for question one, you were a freshman football player at Marshall University during one of the most tragic moments in sports history. How did that experience shape your outlook on life?
So for those of us that have watched a movie called We Are Marshall, it came out of Hollywood in 2006, and it tells a story, a true story, of a football team that goes off to North Carolina, plays a football game, they come home, 75 people are on board, and the plane crashes on the way home just outside of Huntington, West Virginia. Everyone on board is killed, and I'm an 18-year-old figuring out life. At this point in time in history, freshmen are not playing varsity ball yet. And part of the story is how freshmen then come to play varsity ball. So imagine what shock is like when someone passes, even one of our animals or friends, or we attempt to make sense out of it. As I've made sense out of it over the years, there's something that often happens called survivor's guilt or survivor guilt. And for whatever the reason, psychologically, we tend to feel blame for the reason that the people were killed. And then we take on this guilt, like, why am I still here? And although it's a normal procedure, back then I didn't know it. So I know I wasn't supposed to be on the plane, and I'm living in the athletic dormitory with many of the athletes who are no longer with us. And the payphone rings, and it's Mom on the phone. She goes, "Thank God you're alive." And I go, "Of course, Mom. I wasn't supposed to be here, and I wasn't supposed to be on the plane." Yeah, but thank God you're alive. So what happened internally is I got this message of, why am I so special? How come I'm alive and they're not? Very much in keeping with what we call survivor's guilt. And from it, I was able to switch the message from, it's not that I'm so special, it's that we all have specialness in us. And so I made it a career of teaching, coaching, umpiring, basketball officiating, working in the world of youth sports, adult sports, figuring out how we all get to be special in our own unique way. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate that. You know, very similarly relatable to survivor's remorse in the military. So I appreciate your story. Thank you. Very touching.
Looking back, how has your journey as both an athlete and an educator influenced your approach to teaching and coaching?
There was a point in time where I was pursuing a coaching career. Thought I was going to be a football coach, and I pursued college coaching. Actually made it a travel. I went on a 9-month, 40,000-mile trip in my Volkswagen Bug, looking for coaching positions and touring the country after finishing a master's degree. So I know you were going to ask me about how I shifted out of West Virginia into Cortland. So let me give the background if I may. So playing in West Virginia, I wasn't aware we still had a civil war going on. And I had a teammate who was from Kentucky, and he said, "You know, you're the first Yankee I ever did like." And that took me by surprise. Lots of prejudice. It was surprising to me. Huntington, West Virginia is 715 miles and a 15-hour drive in my Volkswagen Bug, and there was a lot of difference. So a combination of letting go of a society I wasn't comfortable with, people with prejudice. Also figuring out who and what I was as a result of the plane crash. I went back to upstate New York, more in keeping with folks like I'm used to being with in high school. Finished up a degree and went on to Colorado, where I pursued coaching as well as teaching, and got interested in sports psychology. So the idea of how do we maintain our specialness, uniqueness, moved into the sports psychology field of how do we get to be the best that we can be. I was around Olympic athletes, became a runner, trained with some of the Olympic athletes, and health and fitness became very important. And so it wasn't hard to keep physical education and the idea of health being our greatest wealth and to continue to pursue it. And I was able to keep myself as an athlete over the years. I'm not sure that I'm addressing your question.
No, yeah.
Yeah, that was perfect, yeah. So, Ron, would you do me a favor and help, for those that are unfamiliar, explain what memory art is and how it helps students and adults both learn alike?
So in the process of understanding how we learn, so there's a fancy word, we call it metacognition, thinking about how we think. And in this day and age, we don't actually come to understand thinking about thinking. We're too engrossed in our thinking. So I'm gonna share with you. When I got to be part of a research group in Colorado, having finished my master's, there was a lot of work around how the brain functions, and we came to understand that the brain functions in two different ways, the hemispheres. Back in the 60s and 70s, back in the early 60s, individual had epilepsy. And what we did in neuroscience is we disconnected one hemisphere from the other, thinking that would cure the epilepsy. What it did is it cut off one side of the body from the other. So I wasn't aware that my arm was waving until I actually could see my arm waving. As we came to understand what was happening left brain, right brain, we established that left brain, left for logic, thinking, words. Notice these are all black and white. If I were to start humming, I'd be out of my left brain and I'd go over into the right hemisphere. And this has been validated over the years that we get to be one or the other or both. Ideal is both. Typically our schooling is, how are we thinking? Well, how are we feeling? Oh, we don't have time for our feeling, let's get back to our thinking. So we lost our balance. And memory art became a way to introduce what became a movement in the 90s. So in the 90s, we had what was called multiple intelligences. And a gentleman at Harvard said, you know, a lot of people don't pass written tests, and yet they're still brilliant. What's up with that? And I'm sure some of the audience can relate. I don't do well with writing. And I can draw great pictures, or I can create poetry, or I can act it out. And at the time he came up with what was called 7 intelligences, multiple intelligences. And there was a movement in education for a lot of years aimed at addressing the verbal person, the visual person, the intrapersonal, which means I can do it by myself, and I'm real good at figuring it out by myself, or interpersonal, and then cooperative learning became a big movement, and let's share together. And then there was one called body kinesthetic, and the athletes can be very good at body kinesthetic, dancing, acting. Musical, and so there are some who have the affinity for music, playing instruments, or just creating rap, and we have different ways of learning information and showing how we are remembering the information. And so it was a way to broaden our education scope by offering multiple intelligences as a curriculum. The memory art became the visual component of the 7 intelligences back then. An 8th was added later with what was called naturalists, people with an affinity for nature. And now there's others which were addressing esoteric and things like that. So memory art was a way to create visuals of people speaking. Now this particular piece addresses what's going on inside of us while we're processing information. So the gal that gave this talk, this is her book. She's no longer with us, she's passed on. Candace Pert, and the book is Molecules of Emotion. Why we feel the way we feel. Again, we don't typically address our feelings when we're dealing with measurement in the scope of school. And yet, the students are feeling up a storm inside their blank stares or making believe they're listening. Which is not to say you're not listening, it's just that sometimes we're in other places. So the neurophysiology, and they had a fancy name for it, called psychoneuroimmunology. A lot of big words for what's happening at a chemical level. So we're run by our emotions and the ability to emote favorably or detrimentally, or even to the point of self-talking. I'm so stupid. Well, hope I didn't say that out loud. So she explains the idea of receptivity relative to what's going on with the neurochemistry and what's happening on amino acids, ultimately what's happening in the brain. We've now come to understand that it's less about the brain, even though we make believe the brain is most important because that's the way we've been trained in school. It's not that the brain is the center of the universe, rather we're coming into a new awareness around heart awareness. And we actually have a name for it called heart intelligence. And so even as the heart itself is still being stimulated by brain chemicals, and we're being triggered to behaviors and memories, and if you notice with this going arrows, and the arrow takes us through the sequence. No rules, it's just giving self permission to free flow with what's coming forward. And then we have to give self permission to draw something. We can draw a flag, but I don't have a key. I don't know how to draw a key. I'm going to have a key in my pocket. I'll just put a key up there and then I can draw a key. And then ultimately we can only hold one emotion at a time, just as we can only hold one thought at a time. Except we can do it really, really quick, so it sounds like we're multitasking, and we're not. We're just processing very quickly. So if there's pain, it's emotional trauma stored in the body, and ultimately all learning is emotional, and it's also sensory. So think about a time, sensory integration for cellular regeneration. So ultimately we're all covered in skin and we have all this molecules of energy inside of us, and we're attempting to make sense of it all. I'm getting away from the memory art piece, except that's the nature of that particular unit.